crime boss executed by a hitman in London. And honestly, it's almost ridiculous how brazen the whole thing was. A latex mask, a hi-vis vest, and 10 bullets in front of a family home showed that subtlety clearly wasn't on the packing list. Who knew a millionaire's doorstep could turn into ground zero for Europe's gang war? Flamur Bakiri, 36, was shot dead in front of his screaming wife as she shielded their 2-year-old son. The news of Bakiri's brutal murder quickly becomes a major headline across Europe. On Christmas Eve 2019, while families across South London settled in for a night of peace, one street in Battersea was about to witness something brutal. Flamur Bakiri returned home with his wife and young child, walking toward the front door of his £1 million townhouse after spending the evening celebrating. Waiting in the shadows was a man disguised as something harmless, a council street cleaner. As the family stepped closer to the door, the hitman raised a gun and pulled the trigger. 10 shots cracked through the cold night air. 8 of them struck Bakiri in the back. His wife screamed as he collapsed on the pavement, their child frozen in. Shock. In just seconds, a family gathering had turned into a public execution. Without hesitation, the killer carried out his escape plan. He jumped on a bicycle and pedaled away into London's traffic. It was a method chosen carefully, enough to slip away before the neighborhood could even react. Within hours, he was gone from the country, leaving behind a devastated family. To many, Flamur Bakiri seemed like the last person this could happen to. He lived like a man who had built success through music and business. But there is something which was hidden. Mr. Bakiri, who had joint Swedish and Albanian nationality, claimed to be in the music business, but had been involved in the international drugs trade since 2007. BBC uncovered that Bakiri's life was not what it seemed. Bakiri had long been a name known to police across Europe. Born in Albania and raised in Sweden, he was suspected of running much more than a music business. Authorities linked him to drug trafficking, weapons smuggling, and money laundering, activities that stretched across Scandinavia and into other parts of Europe. In 2018, Swedish police named him as one of the country's most wanted men. Some charges against him were later dropped, but he was still convicted for handling smuggled goods, though he escaped with only a suspended sentence. Even then, he never escaped suspicion. What made him a true target were the people he kept close. Bakiri was tied to powerful figures in the criminal underworld. He was connected to Daniel Petrovsky, an Albanian-Swedish gang leader, and to Naif Adawi, a convicted armed robber known for one of Sweden's biggest heists. Those ties placed him on one side of a growing feud that stretched beyond borders. On the other side was Amir Mechi, a Danish-based gang boss with his own network of influence. The rivalry between Petrovsky and Mechi was already violent, but it turned deeply personal in 2019 when Adawi's partner, Carolina Hakim, was gunned down in Malmö. That act shocked the criminal world and sent a clear signal that no one was off limits. The murder of Flamur Bakiri was not random. It was the result of a gang war that stretched far beyond London, a conflict rooted in bloodshed that had already shocked Europe. Bakiri was also friends with the boyfriend of Caroline Hakim, who was shot dead in Malmö in August while walking with her partner and their baby. Gunmen thought to be targeting her boyfriend shot Hakim in the head. Months before his killing, in the Swedish city of Malmö, Caroline Hakim was shot dead while holding her baby. She was the partner of Naif Adawi, one of the key figures tied to Bakiri's circle. The hit was deliberate, cruel, and designed to send a message. It told everyone involved that nothing was sacred, not even family. In the underworld, that act was a line crossed, one that made retaliation certain. Adawi's allies, including Petrovsky and Bakiri, knew blood would follow. And in the chessboard of European gangs, Bakiri became the next piece to be removed. The feud was no longer about business. It was about survival and dominance between syndicates from Albania, Sweden, and Denmark, each trying to crush the other before being crushed themselves. The BBC reported that Hemzi disguised himself as a litter picker while secretly preparing for the murder. His covert allowed him to move unnoticed, but to understand how Hemzi reached this point, we need to look at his background and how he was drawn into Bakiri assassination. To carry out Bakiri's assassination, the masterminds needed someone unexpected. They turned to Anis Hemzi, a 24-year-old kickboxer from Sweden. On the surface, he was the last person anyone would suspect. He had no criminal record, no history with gangs, and his background looked clean. That made him perfect. He could slip through airports, pose as a tourist, and never draw the attention of police watching for known criminals. But in London, he became something very different. Armed with a latex mask, a high-visibility jacket, gloves, and props, Hemzi transformed into a street cleaner who could move freely without suspicion. For days, he stood near Bakiri's home, watching, learning his movements. Neighbors even spoke to him, believing he was a council worker. He stayed calm, patient, and focused, waiting for the moment he would strike. When the night came, he was ready, a silent predator hiding in plain sight. But Hemzi was not working alone. Behind him was a network that turned the murder into a professional operation. The safe house at Oyster Wharf became the center of activity. It was rented by Esteban Pino Munizaga, who stocked it with disguises, weapons, and supplies. Clifford Rollocks, 31, Islington, North London, and Dutch national. Claude Isaac Castor, 31, from St. Martin in the Caribbean, were found guilty of perverting the course of justice after being hired locally to clean up the flat where the killers had stayed. In London, Clifford Rollocks and Claude Isaac acted as fixers, providing Hemzi with the equipment and support he needed on the ground. And far away in Sweden, Tobias Anderson and Bawar Karaya were believed to be pulling strings, coordinating on behalf of Amir Mechi's gang. The whole operation ran like a military mission, spread across countries but connected with precision. Yet even in such a carefully built structure, there was a flaw. One mistake, small but critical, would unravel the plan and expose the man behind the mask. He rode a lady's bike and wore a latex mask before shooting Bakiri 8 times from behind. However, CCTV footage allowed detective to trace Hemzi on foot and then bicycle to a flat he had rented in Oyster Wharf. The article tells us how he makes silly mistakes, which led the detectives to him. For a time, the assassin in the street cleaner's disguise looked untouchable. He had slipped out of London with speed and precision, but the smallest mistakes began to surface. Detectives followed the grainy glow of CCTV and noticed a green lady's bicycle weaving through the city the night of the murder. When that same bike was recovered, it carried more than scratches. It was laced with gunshot residue, a silent fingerprint that tied it to the execution. At the safe house in Oyster Wharf, another error waited in the trash. A ripped boarding pass, carelessly torn and tossed, still bore part of Anis Hemzi's name. It was the kind of clue investigators call a gift, the shred of paper that exposed the ghost. Inside the flat, the evidence grew. Food wrappers and empty bottles carried his DNA, linking him directly to the hideout. And in the digital shadows, his phone betrayed him too. When he was inside the safe house, the signal lit up. When he stepped out to stalk Bakiri's home, the device went silent. The pattern matched perfectly with the timeline of surveillance. The assassin's mask was slipping, and the ghost had left too many traces behind. When the case reached the courtroom, the fight was no longer in the streets, but in words and evidence. The prosecution built Hemzi's image into that of a professional killer, a hired gun in Amir Mechi's escalating gang war. They laid out the mountain of proof piece by piece. As we see here, the CCTV footage captures Hemzi cleverly disguising himself as a road cleaner. But this footage became solid proof of his crime and eventually helped authorities catch him. From disguised road cleaner caught on camera to forensic clues traced back in London, every detail led investigators closer to him. Witnesses described the strange man in high-vis gear, cleaning nothing while keeping his eyes fixed on Bakiri's home. It was all presented as the work of a cold-blooded assassin, sent with one mission and no mercy. The defense countered with a different picture. They argued that Hemzi was a pawn, a young sportsman caught in a deadly game he barely understood. They painted him as a naive kickboxer, manipulated by forces far stronger and more dangerous than himself. But the weight of evidence was crushing, and the jury had little doubt. In February 2022, the verdict came back. Hemzi was guilty of murder, sentenced to life with a minimum of 35 years behind bars. The fighter had been turned into a killer, and now the killer was caged. The trial did not end with Hemzi. The ripples spread to those who had played smaller but crucial roles. Esteban Pino Munizaga, who had rented the safe house and provided the hub for the operation, was given 15 years. Clifford Rolox, 31, from Islington, North London, and Dutch national Claude Isaac Castor, 31, from Sint Maarten in the Caribbean, were each jailed for 3 years. Clifford Rolox and Claude Isaac, who cleaned up the flat and helped Hemzi on the ground, both were caught up by police. Each received 3 years, serving at least half before release. But the ones believed to be higher up the chain walked free. Tobias Anderson and Bawar Karaya, suspected of coordinating the mission from Sweden, were acquitted. The jury did not find enough proof to bind them to the murder, even though investigators remained convinced of their role. In the end, justice in court punished some but spared others. The court called it an organized, cold-blooded execution, but the acquittals left one truth unsettled. In the end, some players paid the price, while the real mastermind may still be out there,